From year to year, month to month, week to week, and day to day, people across the world are obsessed with a phenomenon that is professional wrestling. But why? 101 reasons to love professional wrestling. There are many components of professional wrestling that should be both understood and celebrated, in no particular order. Debuts with vignettes. The word vignette comes from the French meaning little vine. In theater, literature, and in professional wrestling, a vignette is a short presentation used to introduce the audience to a new character or characters that will soon be added to the mix. The cast of crazy characters in wrestling is infinite, but some characters need explaining before they invade the world, the ring, and our minds. Thanks to vignettes, a performer debuting into a company for the first time or a performer debuting a new persona can make an impact before even taking a single bump. We see who they are, what they're about, and their initial motivation for joining the roster. Some of these are simple and to the point, some are more ominous, and others, they're just weird. The 90s saw horrible gimmicks eat up the airtime, but there were some solid characters rolled out during this time. Mr. Perfect showcased his athletic perfection with a series of memorable videos. The bizarre one, Goldust, brought us a taste of Hollywood. IRS, Erwin R. Shyster, gave us tax cheats, the tips to get us on the law-abiding path. JEFF, JARRETT, haha, Jeff Jarrett, showed us what it took to be a country music star. Chris Jericho would enter the WWF in 1999 via the legendary Countdown to the Millennium Clock that would mysteriously appear for months, leading up to the inevitable Countdown of Zero. And who could forget Edge's moody, Blade-like introduction videos that were actually pretty cool and gave his debut a much-added boost. In the late 2010s, fans of professional wrestling have been treated to some very compelling character pieces. One great example would be the recent introduction of Jon Moxley, getting out of his proverbial WWE shackles and entering the world of All Elite Wrestling. And then there's Bray Wyatt's transformation from cult leader, which itself had some great vignettes introducing the character, to now the host of the Firefly Funhouse and The Fiend. And then some character vignettes in professional wrestling just don't connect. Either they don't make sense, or the character just isn't as marketable as anticipated. Some don't get a chance, like in Billy Jack Hayes from the 80s, Sean O'Hare's Devil's Advocate character, or NXT's standout stable Sanity. But others just flat out flopped. An example would be in the 80s when WWE tried to capitalize on the success of Crocodile Dundee with the character Outback Jack. The 90s also gave us Repo Man taking people's stuff, Waylon Mercy being awesomely creepy, and Dean Douglas failing out of the WWF not too long after debuting. The 2000s have not been innocent of failed attempts either. Thankfully, some talents can reinvent themselves in spite of the introduction they're given. Kofi Kingston came in with a Jamaican accent, and would later be added to a soulful group named The New Day. And this New Day is definitely not the New Day that fans across the world have grown to love. Some vignettes actually create more questions than answers. Who would want to remember Beaver Cleavage? What was WCW thinking with the re-debut of Goldust Dustin Reynolds with the kind of questionable intro videos of the new character Seven? When were we ever going to see Emelina debut despite vignettes airing practically forever? And really, what was Glacier going to really accomplish after thawing out? So many questions, so little time. They say becoming a star in professional wrestling is like capturing lightning in a bottle. Sometimes, that lightning strikes because a star's debut is well hyped with exceptional vignette videos. Tournaments. The term tournament goes back to the medieval times, where it was used to describe a combatant going through a series of events in pursuit of victory. Today, tournaments are used for everything from poker championships, video game competitions, and even Jeopardy has a tournament of champions. The use of tournaments is mostly associated with sports, most notably the NCAA's annual basketball championship tournament. Its roots go back to 1939 with Oregon winning the first championship, to to now a month-long event known as March Madness. In professional wrestling tournaments, we see the field of competitors often start off with 8, 16, or even 32 in some cases, and go through an in-ring war, round by round, until there's a final 2. There have been tournaments in professional wrestling for centuries, but Japanese Wrestling Association's World Big League Tournament set the standard. From 1959 through 1972, this tournament was dominated by the man Rikidozan, who also by luck owned the company. The JWA would shut down and New Japan Pro Wrestling's G1 Climax would take the ball and run with it. The G1 Climax tournament would give us many dream matches and many memorable winners. Not to be left out, the WWF would go on to create the King of the Ring. Starting in 1985, the King of the Ring has established many WWF stars on their way to becoming icons. The King of the Ring would come and it would go, but has returned again in 2019 with a victory by Baron Corbin. The 80s would also introduce us to the Crockett Cup tournament. NWA's Best competed in a tag team tournament from 1986 to 1988. This historic tournament has recently returned with the NWA's renaissance in the late 2010s. The independent promotions of the world have also had great success with their own annual tournaments. Established in the 90s, ECWA's long-running Super 8 tournament has been a measuring stick of greatness and keeps going today. There's also PWG's Battle of Los Angeles, Chikara's King of Trios tournament, and more consistently putting out great elimination-style tournaments every year. However, tournaments aren't always an annual event. Sometimes a tournament is used to showcase new stars or new ideas. Sometimes a tournament crowns the first champion of a new division. Sometimes a tournament can decide the top contender. Sometimes a tournament can fill a void in crowning a vacant championship, as is the case with WrestleMania 4, which saw Macho Man Randy Savage outlast 13 other WWF superstars to become the new WWF World Champion. Then the same championship would need to be filled again at the 1998 Survivor Series pay-per-view. This memorable tournament saw some great matches that would inevitably lead to The Rock winning the whole thing and joining the corporation. A well-done tournament can be a great pleasure to any professional wrestling fan. At the same rate, they could also be something we would rather forget. We all love tournaments. We all love the playoffs. We all love the road to the championship. Professional wrestling tournaments give us unexpected dream matches with unexpected results, surprising upsets, heroes crowned, glimpses into the future, and history being written before our very eyes. Diversity. There are a plethora of colors and they all have their place in the cram box of life. We are given the choice of size in most situations because people have different preferences. Just like crayons and coffee, people come in different colors and different sizes. It's a beautiful world when you think about it. Our society has different sexes, nationalities, creeds, cultures, and lineages that make up the human race. Professional wrestling is no different. Professional wrestlers come in all sorts of shapes, all sorts of sizes, heroes of all races, badasses of all sexes, of all creeds, of all orientations, and of all cultures. Yes, professional wrestling is one big happy family. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Just like world history, there are horrible truths that should not be ignored. Professional wrestling has been plagued by stereotypical characters, where foreign characters are always evil, cultures mocked, entire races parodied, and some very offensive depictions. But again, like society, professional wrestling is no different. The upward battle against discrimination has always been a struggle. In the late 1950s, when America still had segregated water fountains, professional wrestling had Sputnik Monroe, a white man who did not care at all about race and would even be cited for a $25 fine for mopery or hanging out with African Americans. In the early 70s, Monroe would even go on to form one of the first mixed-race tag teams, as he teamed with Norval Austin, a black man, to much dismay of closed-minded fans and industry alike. Sputnik's integrity and the pure talents of the likes of Bobo Brazil would pave the way for future greatness, thanks to black female wrestling pioneers like Ramona Isbell, who was good enough to entertain Southern fans, but not good enough to eat in their restaurants. Today's modern stars can strive. With initiatives like WWE's Women's Revolution, the 2010s have seen professional wrestling make gigantic waves to feature everyone. All Elite Wrestling is another great example of a new promotion completely ignoring the ways of old to pave a new, all-inclusive path. Stereotypes are becoming further and further behind us. Barriers have not only been knocked down, but knocked out. Any culture can be championed. Whoever you are can be represented. Professional wrestling fans embrace all cultures. We don't care about your personal life. We don't care if you're from the northern border or the southern border. We don't care about your religious beliefs. We don't care if you're a French giant or a ravishing Russian. We don't care if you pump a fist or take a bow. Take pride in your roots. Stand tall. Stand united. Because at the end of the day, the fans of professional wrestling are listening. The world is watching. If someone says something that pushes us back to the days of old, the world definitely hears it. When you're popular in wrestling, you're considered over. That itself is colorblind. History has proven that what matters most is the connection between the performer and the crowd. When you're over, you're over. And after the bell sounds at the end of a great match, a professional wrestling fan just wants to be entertained. Entrance music. Music is considered the universal art. It's something that all ears can share in, experience, and enjoy. It's a pulse of melodic energy, a contagious beat, a tantalizing tempo. To capitalize on these emotion-inducing tunes, a long-time tradition in professional wrestling is entrance music. When entering ringside, a professional wrestler is often accompanied by their own signature entrance music. The moment this music hits, the anticipating crowd automatically knows how to react. It could be a classical composition like Ric Flair's epic entrance to Also Sprach Zarathustra, Macho Man Randy Savage's Pomp and Circumstance, or Daniel Bryan's use of Flight of the Valkyries. It could be an upbeat jam, a slow-tempoed song, or just about anything that strikes an emotional chord with the crowd. It could be any genre of music. Wrestling is often fueled by rock and roll, but the options are limitless. West Texas Rednecks and the Godwins gave us memorable country themes. Hip-hop has been represented by the likes of John Cena, Mark Henry, and New Jack. Let's not forget about the immaculate classical compositions like Mr. Perfect's Perfect Music, Shinsuke Nakamura's Violin Classic, or the screeching guitars of Bret the Hitman Hart's theme. ECW gave us just about everything that was cool about the 90s. There have been boy bands, funk, opera, disco, and everything in between. A lot of these classic songs have been created by three eras of musicians. The 1980s had Hall of Fame manager Jimmy Hart dazzle the keys for the entrances of Honky Tonk Man, Dusty Rhodes, Legion of Doom, and more. Jim Johnston created some of the best theme songs of all time during the 90s and the 2000s. We're talking Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mr. McMahon, and hundreds more we all hum in private. And then the collective known as CFOs knocked out some of the latest hits of the 2010s with instant classics like Bobby Roode's Glorious, Kevin Owens' Fight, Asuka's The Future, and the boom-bastic entrance for the Undisputed Era, to name a few. These works of audio expression have made lasting generational impressions, so it would be remiss not to take a moment to recognize the lyrical brilliance of professional wrestling entrance songs. So, I close this with what I call an ode to the entrance theme. Look in my eyes. What do you see? You think you know me? I can slap a tornado. I can dry up a sea. I hear voices in my head. they talk to me. Everybody's got a price. Everybody's gonna pay. Bad Street, Atlanta, GA. Baddest street in the whole USA. I come from tomorrow to take back today. Feel the power. Today is a new day. Who's that jumping out the sky when it comes smashing down and it hurts inside? It's a mystery, I don't know why. If you ever take a trip down to Cobb County, Georgia, you better read the signs. Somebody gonna get their wig split, cause it's all about the game and how you play it. Their knees get weak whenever I'm around. Bow to the masters, break it down. Oh, you didn't know? Spend my day working hard on the go. Unlike the Mounties, we always get our man, and we're off to Never Never Land. The cheap pop. The act of pandering to an audience has been part of sales going back to the snake oil salesmen, ill-intended preachers, and snake in the grass politicians. It's gratification of the masses in a non-genuine gesture or declaration. It's an attempt to appeal to a crowd or draw support by telling them what they want to hear. In professional wrestling, this is the cheap pop. The pop is an eruption of emotion from the crowd. It's the roaring reaction to the situation at hand. A cheap pop is when a wrestler incites a positive reaction from the crowd by using a cheesy tactic. Basically, the wrestler does whatever it takes to kiss the crowd's collective rear end. And it works. We fans become creatures of habit. We come to the show to see the show. This means we have no issue in participating in the cheap pop rituals. Many wrestlers pander with patriotism. Everyone loves the hometown hero. Hall of Famer Ron Simmons gets the cheap pop by using one damn word. There is no way a crowd can hate someone who is being nice to the kids. No one can boo a guy supporting the same local sports team they support. The chances of getting booed when the crowd sees a wrestler hanging out with a big star are pretty slim. The cheap pop makes it easy to get a crowd of people with similar interests to take notice. The crowd loves to interact. Whether it's throwing up a Daniel Bryan yes, a too sweet hand symbol, or wooing after every chop, professional wrestling knows exactly what buttons to press to electrify a crowd. When a rock star comes to town and tells the adoring crowd that their city is the best, it's no different than The Rock finally coming back to place your city here, Mick Foley being thrilled to be right here and place your city here, or Scott Hall asking place your city here if they're there to see the NWO. If it helps the wrestler make one extra person in the crowd cheer them on and it doesn't hurt anyone, there's nothing wrong with a little indulgence of the place your city here. Hardcore. The noun hardcore has a few meanings. It's the most active or committed members of a group or movement. It's also defined as explicit and extreme. In professional wrestling, the term hardcore is reserved for the extreme use of weapons in an effort to claim victory. However, the use of weapons in battle is not exclusive to professional wrestling. Accessorized combat has been around since cavemen learned that rocks do indeed hurt. There is even hardcore warfare in the Bible. The world's most best-selling book features the likes of axes, bows and arrows, clubs, daggers, maces, spears, and swords. In some cases, weapon usage can even be considered high art. In professional wrestling, there have been no-holds-barred and hardcore matches since the 1950s and 60s. These brawls would be under street fight, cage, and bull rope match rules, among others. In most cases, a hardcore stipulation match is reserved to settle a long-term blood feud, but some wrestlers have turned these not-so-random acts of violence into their identity and norm. Hardcore would evolve across the world as the likes of The Sheik, Abdullah the Butcher, Carlos Colon, Terry Funk, and Bruiser Brody all made names for themselves and their promotions by going to a physical extreme to thrill the crowd. In the late 1980s, FMW was formed. a Japanese-based company with a focus on death matches. Then in the 1990s came Extreme Championship Wrestling, a company that became an American alternative with the likes of the homicidal, suicidal, and genocidal Sabu, the original gangster New Jack, and of course the hardcore legend himself, Cactus Jack, to name a few, paved the way for hardcore wrestling in America. ECW's edgy content would influence the WWF's Attitude Era. The WWF jumped right on the hardcore bandwagon with the use of tables, ladders, chairs, trash cans and shopping carts, and even sledgehammers and mannequin heads. And in modern times, these weapons are still being used, but now with equal opportunity for carnage. At the same time, the deathmatch counterculture and hardcore tributes are just as prominent today. After ECW, companies like IWA Mid-South, Extreme Pro Wrestling or XPW, and CZW have carried the hardcore and deathmatch baton. In the latest evolutions of hardcore, Game Changer Wrestling has stepped up to the plate. They are not shy to use barbed wire, violent contraptions, and even beds of nails. Hardcore is definitely still part of the mainstream. All Elite Wrestling does not seem to hesitate in using graphic violence and staple gun cigarettes to get eyes on their product. And it would be safe to say that Impact Wrestling definitely has a hardcore edge to it. And obviously, so does the House of Hardcore promotion, a company ran by the innovator of violence himself, Tommy Dreamer. We professional wrestling fans can get a little wild sometimes, but sometimes it can get a little too far. The stunned emotion of a crimson mask is part of our legacy. But that's what it's all about. Hardcore is emotion. And sometimes that emotion is psychotic. It's doing whatever it takes to defeat your opponent, even at one's own physical expense. True fans know that hardcore isn't just swinging weapons and drawing blood. They know it's an attitude, it's a way of life. It's just not giving a damn. But if there's a weapon in hand, anyone can be hardcore. Every day is Halloween. The history of Halloween can be told in many forms, but in general, it's a night to dress up in any costume you want and have a good time. You can be anything for Halloween, from jokers, smokers, and midnight tokers, to a puppet, a pauper, a pirate, a poet, a pawn, and a king. From Steve Miller all the way to Frank Sinatra. And this is perfectly okay, because like the industrial metal pioneers Ministry so boldly proclaimed, to me, every day is Halloween. In professional wrestling, the idea of having a Halloween-worthy character would evolve from the use of nicknames like the Hammer, the Lion, and other circus-inspired gimmicks. This carny-loving world of wrestling would always have the oddball characters, the so-called freaks, and the monsters step in to help put over the good guy. These zany characters would come and go without ever leading a territory or taking on a world-level championship. This would carry on into the 1980s as the WWF ignited a character boom. You would see warriors, tornadoes, tugboats, immortals, and police officers square off in the ring. Meanwhile, WCW and elsewhere weren't shy to give it a go as well. For better or for worse, these characters are part of history and were even part of current pop culture at the time. Then, in the early 1990s, the WWF put their top title on The Undertaker. It was short-lived, but it opened the Hell's Gates to legitimize the possibilities of any character being champion. Down south, WCW was starting to soar, with a face-painted surfer named Sting being established as a top guy. The 90s would give us many treats in the form of spooky, eccentric, and fun characters. But with every treat comes the trick, as the 90s weren't so kind for some. If mental images of the Dungeon of Doom didn't steal your candy bag already, get your eggs and toilet paper aimed for some of the tricks of the 2000s, as we were treated to the likes of the Boogeyman, a high-flying bunny, and other poisonous characters. And like every era, the 2000s have given us genuinely fun and interesting oddballs, so-called freaks, and monsters. They say the freaks come out at night, but if a wrestling show is booked for the afternoon, then by God, the freaks come out in the afternoon. At the end of the night, we all want to take in our haul of candy. Some of it is great, but there's also a large portion of non-edible nonsense. But still, we wouldn't trade the experience for the world. It's easy to understand why a fan of professional wrestling would want every day to be Halloween, or at least a few weeknights and a Sunday or two a month. The hot tag. There have been many famous duos that have had each other's backs through thick and thin. There's Batman and Robin, Lennon and McCarthy, Jake and Elwood, Jay and Silent Bob, and of course, Bert and Ernie, to name a few historical duos throughout time. As is the case with professional wrestling, the addition of tag team wrestling has been around since the beginning of the modern sport. These traditionally 2-on-2 matchups are an opportunity for the fans to cheer a tandem and for the performer to share the creative experience with another wrestler. The hot tag occurs when one of the good guys has been beaten up so bad and so long by the dastardly duo that the moment their desperately extended hand tags their partner, the crowd erupts. The anxiously rested partner enters the ring and essentially beats up both bad guys, thus ending their evil momentum. This instance provides the crowd with hope, as a well-done hot tag gets them to their feet with adrenaline matching the freshly tagged in competitor. There have been some iconic tag teams throughout professional wrestling history, the likes of Harlem Heat, the Road Warriors, the Hart Foundation, the Rock and Roll Express, the Hardy Boys, the Rockers, Edge and Christian, the Steiner Brothers, the Dudley Boys, New Age Outlaws, the Young Bucks, the Briscoes, the Usos, the New Day, SCU, and hundreds more are either in the Hall of Fame or definitely worthy of that high honor. Of course, a great persona and great rivals go into achieving this level of acclaim. However, a large part of what makes a tag team great is great matches. Some have had success because of memorable moments, but when it's broken down to the basics, it's all about the hot tag. A professional wrestling match can be grueling enough. Add another opponent, and it can be torturous. As fans, we watch our favorite superstars get worn down, beaten up, and dominated by the great heels. We slowly find ourselves at the edge of our seats. Our fingernails start to dwindle down. Our hopes solely rest in the feet of the face in peril reaching his partner for the tag. Then those dastardly heels cut our hero off. But we keep waiting. We keep cheering for this performer to reach their partner, and at that specific moment in time, nothing else in the outside world matters. And just as our faith truly starts to be tested, it happens. The hot tag. Robes. There are an overabundance of clothing items that a professional fighter can wear to the ring. Many of the greats have went with the entrance robe. A robe is a loose-fitting outer garment with many purposes. It can be part of academia regalia, worn as a judge, religious dress, rocked in royalty, and fantasy literature. And it's a conveniently warm option for exiting the bath, or in sports, exiting the locker room. The walk from the locker room can be pretty long. Sometimes the warmth of a robe is called for to maintain the warmth from a pre-fight warm-up. And there is no reason these robes cannot be magnificent works of fashionable art. Robes have been part of professional wrestling from the very beginning of the sport, and in all countries. These no-frill robes were worn by some of the greatest of the black and white era. Also during this time, the incorporation of glamour can be credited to the flamboyant Gorgeous George. His robes were unlike his predecessors, as they were part of his act and persona. And that is no exaggeration. his character would not exist without his passion for his robe. One night, when wearing his entrance robe to the ring, he was taking too much time folding it. This tested the patience of the crowd to a near riotous atmosphere. And when you're a heel, this is exactly what you want. So George Wagner ran with it. During his career, he would enrage crowds across the country with his collection of over 100 robes decked out in lace, sequins, and fur. Thousands of tickets and even thousands of televisions were sold with the goal of seeing Gorgeous George get his just desserts. The entrance robe would become part of the abnormal norm that is professional wrestling. And of course, when talking about entrance robes, we have to talk about the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. The stylin', profilin', limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling and dealing son of a gun is the king of the entrance robe. Since the 1970s, Ric Flair has graced the crowds with the awe-inspiring custom-made garment of glory. These fabulous fabrics cost the man a reportedly $10,000 a pop, so they should definitely look great. And they most definitely woo. Ric Flair is known for many things: his great matches, his great promos, and his great entrance robes. In 2008, the robe he wore at WrestleMania 24 was donated and featured at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. In 2017, one of Ric Flair's iconic robes even sold for $27,000 in auction. In the same year, the Nature Boy was honored in the form of a beautiful statue. Of course, it's in an entrance robe. Some would attempt to rock the robe, but fail to live up to its status. Others would have success with the casual coat. Some would go with the glitz, and a few would carry on legacies. Whether it's for the majesty, the glamour, or the convenient warmth, a professional wrestling fan knows that the entrance robe should always be respected, because we fans know that Ric Flair is always watching. High spots. When spectating, there is nothing better than the rush of a big moment. This boost of endorphins wakes up the crowd. It's the big climax in music. In the NBA, it's a slam dunk. It's the Hail Mary pass. It's stealing home in the bottom of the ninth. These moments are no stranger to professional wrestling. However, the pioneering years of professional wrestling had a much different landscape than what we are used to today. Matches consisted of grappling and wear-down holds as the wrestlers sought their victories. Leaving one's feet was unheard of unless it was done by the force of their opponent. Then in the late 1920s, things began to change. The introduction of flying impact and risk-filled maneuvers were introduced. These big moves would be the groundwork of high spots as we know it today. Former NFL player Gus Sonnenberg would utilize the flying tackle. Abe Coleman, the Hebrew Hercules, not to be confused with Abe Froman, the Sausage King of Chicago, is credited for the inclusion of the dropkick. Coleman claimed to have borrowed the idea from kangaroos. Then Antonio Rocca adopted the dropkick, but also included hurricanranas and the flying body press. The hurricanrana itself was created by Huracan Ramirez, who would wrap his legs around his opponent's neck and roll them down to the mat. Meanwhile in Mexico, Mando Guerrero was establishing the moonsault as part of the lucha arsenal that already included many flips, dives, and leaps. Then in the 1980s, the idea of high flying and leaping moves became more of the norm, which saw many historic moments formed due to the high spot. This would evolve in the 90s, as wrestling's top stars became smaller and the risky moves became much larger. High-flying legends like Rey Mysterio Jr., Ultimo Dragon, and a slew of others made high-flying impact on a global scale. By the turn of the century, the high spot became a standard in professional wrestling. High spots are not always flippity-doodahs and top rope battles between the smaller weight classes. The bigger stars will leave their feet sometimes just as much as their lighter counterparts. But yeah, a lot of today's high spots are still flippity-doo-dahs. Suicide dives to the outside are in most matches. Top rope moves have evolved into 450s, inverted 450s, and moves that leave the crowd in amazement and glee. The risks have gone from simple rolls to rather uncomfortable results. Our attention spans are shrinking, so keeping the attention of the crowd is definitely a challenge. To keep up with this, more high spots are added. And really, it's always been this way. Fans of grappling saw professional wrestling evolve into slams and power moves. Fans from the 80s saw smaller guys come in and literally flip the art of wrestling on its head. Ultimately, professional wrestling matches tell a story. If that story can be told with a big high spot or two, it becomes that much more memorable, especially when the opponent moves.